You call this food for a family gathering? Thomas spat, his voice dripping with contempt. He took one bite of the dish, then violently flipped the plate over, sending food splattering across the table. The room fell silent as all the relatives stared at him in shock. I've never seen anyone throw food on the floor before, someone finally murmured. What's your problem? It's your fault for making such terrible food, Thomas sneered, pointing a finger. You're a stay-at-home wife, and this is what you serve on such an occasion. Who'd eat this crap? I met his gaze, unflinching. I didn't make it, you know. What? Thomas's voice was incredulous, his bravado faltering. This was my moment, my chance to finally stand up to him after all the times he had belittled me. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and prepared to speak. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. Up until a year ago, I worked at a condominium management company, but I resigned after getting married to become a full-time housewife. If it weren't for the strong insistence of my husband, Thomas, I might have continued working. But Thomas was adamant about me being a stay-at-home wife, so I obliged and left my job. Honestly, I wanted to work a bit longer, but considering Thomas's earnings, I figured we could live comfortably without me working. Thomas works at a major consulting firm. We initially met through work, managing similar projects, and our frequent interactions led to our relationship blossoming from colleagues to a romantic one, ultimately resulting in marriage. Right after graduating from college, Thomas had been hopping through various consulting firms, showing himself to be both competent and articulate. While working with him, I was impressed by his work ethic and took the initiative to approach him romantically. I never thought someone like him would notice me, an ordinary person in terms of looks and abilities, but I was pleasantly surprised when he responded positively to my feelings. I was so happy that after we started dating, I couldn't stop gushing about him to my friends, even though they seemed a bit perplexed. From the bottom of my heart, I believed I had found the pinnacle of happiness. When we decided to get married just over a year into our relationship, I was walking on air, completely giddy and joyous. Little did I know what kind of misfortune awaited me. Listen, I'm busy with work on weekdays, so I'm going to come home only on weekends. Sorry, but please be okay with that. He dropped this bombshell right after we returned home from our wedding ceremony. I, who thought a happy married life was about to begin, was utterly shocked by this unignorable statement. Wait, what does that mean? It means I'll come home only on weekends. It helps to maintain the feelings we had when we were dating, right? But do you have a problem with it? No, I don't. I was, to be honest, dumbfounded by this sudden proposition. Coming home only on weekends, isn't that what's commonly referred to as a weekend marriage? It's strange to decide such an important thing all by oneself. If he really wanted a weekend marriage, he should have told me before we got married. Why did he suddenly proclaim this on the very day we registered our marriage? Sure, seeing each other less might help maintain some of the excitement, but isn't it natural to want to be with the person you love all the time? My initial enthusiasm for our new marriage was quite dampened, and I was more downhearted than I anticipated. Thomas, seeing me like that, treated me unusually kindly that day. Whether it was out of pity or to improve my mood, I'm not sure. That night, we spent our first night as a married couple, and I was able to momentarily push the thought of our weekend marriage out of my mind. Perhaps this was a strategic win for Thomas. In hindsight, Thomas's declaration at that time was just the beginning. Indeed, what lay ahead was much more harrowing than a mere weekend marriage, something I couldn't even begin to imagine at that time. 2 months into our marriage, Thomas stuck to this promise of only coming home on weekends. As a stay-at-home wife, I had envisioned preparing dinners for my tired husband every evening, but my enthusiasm quickly waned. There were weekends when he returned but opted to dine out, rarely tasting anything I prepared. Despite quietly urging us to reconsider our weekend-only arrangement, Thomas dismissed my input, belittling me with remarks like, "Even though you're just a housewife, you oppose me." It became clear that Thomas orchestrated my departure from work to gain control over our home life, ensuring I depended on him financially and couldn't challenge his decisions. That realization left me in tears of frustration at night, wondering how it all went wrong when all I wanted was a happy marriage. It felt like I was trapped in a tunnel with no way out, consumed by anxiety. By the 3rd month of our marriage, Thomas seldom came home, even on weekends, a stark departure from our agreement. What meaning did marriage hold when we barely saw each other? Can we discuss our life together as a couple, please? I gathered courage to ask one Friday night. Thomas, returning home possibly after drinking with colleagues, carried the scent of alcohol mingled with a sweet osmanthus fragrance that caught me off guard. It couldn't possibly be right. I've told you over and over, I ain't planning to change now, slurred Thomas, even in his drunken state, resolute in his stance. But this isn't what we promised. You said we would spend at least the weekends together, didn't you? What about now? You're not coming home on weekends either. I never agreed to this from the start. My words seemed to strike a nerve as Thomas's face flushed red with anger. I knew I had soured his mood instantly. How many times do I have to say it? I ain't budging an inch. Seriously, why do you complain so much? How about you finally get where you stand? Thomas's words cut deeper than his usual dismissiveness, pushing me past anger into a profound sadness. Why did Thomas marry me in the first place? Unable to bear it any longer, I retreated to my room. Later, when I heard Thomas in the shower, I crept out and ventured into his room driven by desperation. I hated stooping to this, but I couldn't continue feeling so powerless to Thomas. Months passed in the same manner, with Thomas and I living mostly separate lives. I stopped confronting Thomas about his absence, resigning myself to quiet endurance. Then, one day, my cell phone rang. It was my mother-in-law, whom I hadn't seen since our wedding ceremony. Curious and unsure of what she could want, I answered the call. Hello. Oh, Sarah, it's me. Hi, is something the matter? I could hear bustling noises in the background, likely from a supermarket or someplace crowded. Christmas is coming up. You're going to come to our place for it, right? All the relatives are gathering, and we want you to come too, Sarah. Oh, for Christmas? Yes, I'll definitely come. Despite agreeing, I couldn't shake the urge to ask about Thomas. Have you talked to Thomas recently? Thomas? Oh yes, I've talked to him several times. I've been reaching out a lot since he finally got married, but he said that his married life is going well, isn't it? Oh, really? I was baffled by my mother-in-law's statement. Did Thomas really tell her our married life was going well? How could he paint such a rosy picture when we barely spent time together in our weekend marriage? Then it dawned on me. Thomas had been feeding his mother deliberate lies about our relationship. My mother-in-law tended to worry about her son and was both kind-hearted and overprotective, as I had observed during our brief meeting. Her fondness for Thomas was evident. I think everything Thomas told you is probably a lie. The truth is, I confided in my mother-in-law, explaining how Thomas had insisted from the beginning of our marriage that he would only come home on weekends. Lately, he hadn't even been sticking to that arrangement. What are you talking about, Sarah? There's no way Thomas would do that. You, on the other hand, are trying to deceive me with lies. Who do you think you are? Her response was sharp and filled with disbelief, her voice rising in anger from the other end of the phone. I sighed heavily, feeling frustrated. This woman believed Thomas as every word without question. She never doubted his fabrications. Even when his own wife spoke up against him, my mother-in-law would fiercely defend him. That was just how she operated. I'm not lying. If it matters to you, I can show you video recordings of what's been happening inside the house for the past month. Fueled by frustration at being painted as the villain despite suffering because of Thomas, I declared this to my mother-in-law. But she cut me off, saying, I don't need you to stoop so low. You're the worst daughter-in-law, and abruptly ended the call, refusing to consider my side. I had anticipated this outcome to some extent. I didn't know what my father-in-law, a man of few words, thought of me, but my mother-in-law likely viewed me solely as a convenient partner for Thomas. Realizing this, I grew weary of continuing my married life as it was, and so I began to put into action a plan I had been contemplating for a while. The execution day arrived, coinciding with the gathering of relatives at my in-laws' home. Uncertain of how things would unfold, I steeled myself for whatever lay ahead. Quietly, a flicker of determination burned in my heart. As promised, on Christmas Day, I accompanied Thomas to his parents' house. Before leaving, I discreetly contacted someone. Unaware of my preparations, Thomas grumbled, going to my parents' place is such a drag, as he sluggishly got ready to depart. Upon arriving at my in-laws' house, I found Thomas's parents, his uncle and aunt, along with their children already gathered. A woman, presumably the housemaid, was busy in the kitchen, wearing glasses and a mask, focused on her tasks without engaging in our conversation. The crowded room made it hard for me to keep track of everyone. Oh, Sarah, welcome, my mother-in-law greeted me, though her words lacked warmth, her eyes devoid of any hint of a smile. I forced a polite smile, my cheeks feeling stiff. Merry Christmas. From then on, there were no direct exchanges between my mother-in-law and me as we all continued with the meal preparations. I joined in the kitchen, assisting with various tasks. My father-in-law, as usual, remained quiet, engrossed in his newspaper on the sofa. Once the food was ready and the table set, everyone began to help themselves to the meal. Thomas stood next to me, serving himself stew as I reached for a dish myself. "You call this food for a family gathering?" With a crash, the ceramic hit the floor, the sound echoing through the room as everyone's shoulders tensed in surprise. Thomas, with just one bite of the dish, flipped the plate over on the table, his voice seething with anger. Shocked gazes from all the gathered relatives fixed on him. I've never seen anyone toss food on the floor before. I'm sure they all felt the same way. "Hey, what's your problem? It's your fault for making such terrible food. You're a stay-at-home wife, and you serve this on such an occasion. Who'd eat this crap?" Thomas sneered. I looked at him with pity and retorted, "I did make it, you know." "What?" Thomas's dumbfounded voice filled the room. This was my chance, the perfect opportunity to confront him after enduring so much. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. "What are you talking about? You were in the kitchen preparing the meal just now, weren't you?" Thomas scoffed, a look of confusion on his face. "Sure, I was, but the housekeeper was there too, right? I was just setting the table. The housekeeper made the meal, right?" I turned towards the housekeeper, who had quietly emerged from the back room, causing the relatives to gasp in surprise. "Yes, that's correct. Actually, this housekeeper is someone I hired. Let me introduce her. It's my mother." The housekeeper, now revealed as my mother, removed her glasses and mask. Thomas and my parents-in-law reacted with astonishment, recognizing her immediately. "Ah, weren't you the housekeeper Thomas hired? I didn't know." "There's no way I'd arrange that. It seems that my mother-in-law thought Thomas had called the housekeeper, and she's shivering." "Thomas, you know about my mother's work, right? She works at a restaurant, making delicious meals every day. But today she made it lightly flavored for us. I wonder why you thought I made the meal." "That's because you were in the kitchen until just now, weren't you?" Thomas, perhaps irritated by my question, raised his voice in anger. Objectively, it might seem natural to assume I made the meal alongside my mother since I had been in the kitchen. However, Thomas rarely eats my cooking and doesn't realize my dishes usually have a stronger flavor profile. I prefer richer tastes, using plenty of salt and spices. "That's true too. However, the main reason is that you've hardly ever eaten my cooking." What do you mean?" Everyone present, except for Thomas, widened their eyes in confusion. Thomas's face paled, freezing on the spot. Deciding to expose his insincerity, I continued. "Thomas declared on the day we registered our marriage that he wouldn't come home on weekdays, that we would only spend weekends together. It's what's known as a weekend marriage. He never mentioned such a thing before we got married." I was shocked. I couldn't agree to it, but even if I opposed or tried to discuss it, he was adamant, saying, "You, a full-time housewife, don't defy me," and he wouldn't listen to my opinions at all. As the truth about our marital life unfolded, shock rippled through Thomas's relatives. Among them, my mother-in-law reacted particularly strongly, her expression almost demon-like as she defended her son vehemently. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the moment settling in. It was time. With determination, I clenched my fists tightly. "Thomas, are you there?" An unfamiliar female voice echoed from the entrance, causing a ripple of unease among Thomas's relatives. One of them asked, "What's going on?" Just then, the living room door swung open, revealing a young woman in a short skirt with bright red nails and shiny hair, looking to be in her early 20s. Her wide-eyed gaze swept across the room, and she exclaimed in disbelief, "Huh? Thomas, what's going on here?" The woman, with a hint of sultriness in her voice, seemed utterly bewildered. Everyone except me struggled to grasp the situation unfolding. "Mary, why are you here?" Thomas addressed her, his shock evident. "Why didn't you invite me? You said you wanted to introduce me to your family, so you asked me to come." "Ha! When did I ever say that?" "2 weeks ago." Mary held up her phone, showing the screen of her message exchange with Thomas, who gasped in response. "I never sent this." "What? Then who did?" With Thomas and Mary vehemently arguing before me, I stepped forward. "Nice to meet you. I'm Thomas's wife. I'm the one who invited you here today." I apologized to Thomas, but I sent the message. "Ha!" Both of them simultaneously dropped their jaws in surprise. Yes, actually, ever since I received the Christmas invitation call from my mother-in-law, I've been planning to confront Thomas. 2 weeks ago, while Thomas was taking a late-night bath after returning home, I quietly slipped out of the bedroom and took his smartphone. I noticed he was frequently communicating with Mary, so I quickly realized she was his mistress. I deceived her into coming here today to expose Thomas and Mary. As Thomas's relatives listened in, rumors began to ripple through the room. My parents-in-law's faces grew visibly pale. I had my suspicions for a while. Why did Thomas start a lifestyle where he only came home on weekends immediately after we got married? A weekend marriage. Even though we're married, we barely see each other. If he truly loved me, why would he choose this? Because I'm busy with work. I've told you that many times, Thomas interjected, still trying to defend himself. But I let out a long sigh. Work, yes. I believed that excuse at first, but the lingering scent of perfume on you when you returned late at night. I had my doubts and eventually hired a detective. Huh? Wait, a detective? What the hell? Thomas stammered, visibly shaken. I took out the infidelity investigation report from the detective agency that I had in my bag and shoved it in front of Thomas and Mary. Suspecting Thomas's infidelity, I had requested the investigation a while ago, and the evidence of his affair was clear and damning. Your relationship began 5 years ago. At that time, Mary was only 15. You picked her up downtown and started dating, but of course, you couldn't marry a child like Mary. Also, Mary is currently working as a bottle girl, so you doubted your parents would approve. Feeling pressured by your parents to marry soon, you settled for a safe choice like me. Once the marriage quieted their nagging, you continued to see Mary quietly, planning to divorce me under the excuse of busy work and then marry her. That's the gist of it, isn't it? I laid out the information from the detective agency report and the messages between Thomas and Mary, exposing their secret relationship. What? What are you saying? Thomas would never. My mother-in-law, attempting to defend Thomas, faltered in the face of the evidence, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Thomas and Mary exchanged fearful glances, and finally Thomas spoke up. Hey, you, that's low. Using these tactics to degrade us. What you're doing is filthy. Those words sparked such intense anger in me that I felt my veins might burst. I screamed, Low, what are you talking about? The one who stooped low here is you, who didn't come home right after we got married, isn't it? You pretended to be close to me while having someone else use me and put yourself on a pedestal, blaming me. You were waiting for me to get fed up and conveniently ask for a divorce myself, weren't you? Well, too bad for you. We're getting a divorce and you'll repay half of the marriage expenses. That's only fair. I fixed a piercing stare on Thomas and Mary, the most intimidating expression I had ever worn. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Let's forget about the repayment. Thomas and the woman pleaded desperately as I glared at them with disdain. Just leave, both of you, I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. Finally, Thomas and his companion fled with shocked shrieks, unable to withstand my fury any longer. I apologized to everyone for causing a scene, I said, regaining my composure as I stepped back. Sighs of disbelief emanated from Thomas's relatives who were undoubtedly stunned by his actions. Sarah, I don't know what to say, my mother-in-law stammered awkwardly, her head lowered in embarrassment. With my own mother beside me, who had played the role of a maid, I left my in-laws' house behind, knowing I would likely never return. And so, my tumultuous one-year marriage with Thomas came to an end. A few days later, I filed for divorce. Now, officially single again, not much changed despite gaining the label of divorcee. Our marriage had been short-lived, and our living situation hardly resembled married life. We had been renting an apartment, which made it easy for me to swiftly remove Thomas from my life. He did eventually pay the repayment I demanded, but he had to borrow money from relatives because he had squandered his earnings on lavish gifts for the woman, designer bags and clothes. Despite working for an elite company, Thomas was broke and reluctantly took a loan from a bank to settle his debts. Witnessing the Christmas debacle, his relatives were unwilling to lend him any more money. As a result, his plans for marriage with the woman were put on hold until he could clear his debts. Both sets of parents seemed to agree that they should not marry, likely tired of being embroiled in their children's troubles. Let him struggle with his debts, I thought, glad to have escaped from a year of suffering that now felt like someone else's problem. Meanwhile, I returned to my former job at the condominium management company and found solace in the routine and challenges of work. It was a stark contrast to the confinement and frustration of being a stay-at-home wife. Quietly, I made a vow to myself that if I ever married again, it would be with someone who valued both our careers equally.